Hello and welcome to this week's Medicinal Monday on the Alter Your Health podcast. I'm Dr. Susanna Alter.
And I'm Dr. Ben.
And we're both naturopathic doctors who support individuals in reversing disease and reclaiming optimal health through whole food plant-based nutrition and mind-body medicine.
We're on this journey from head to toe, altering health from head to toe, and we have covered hair, we've covered skin, and next up is bones. We're going to be talking about creating strong, resilient, dense bones to keep us strong as we're aging and moving through life. It kind of dawned on me as we were preparing today's little episode that we're not talking about bone joints, inflammation, arthritis, and that sort of thing. I'm sure that will be a topic of future conversation. Today, we're really just talking about the ingredients and necessary requirements for creating and maintaining strong, healthy bones. Of course, the inflammatory process in the joints, that's a little bit of a different conversation, but not so different.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. And to explain our reasoning in the order of head to toe, if you really think about it, of course, we started with hair. The very next layer underneath the hair is the skin. And then under that, we could have even broken it down to even more.
The vascular system,
yes,
the lymphatic system,
the nervous system. Yes, totally. But we're going with bone because that's the next major
big thing you run into.
You
go through the skin. Yeah, you got some, subcutaneous fat and blood vessels, but then you get to the bone. So of course, when people hear about a bone and like maintaining healthy bones, of course, the issues that come into conversation are conditions like osteopenia and osteoporosis. Those are the main things that are like the most common bone conditions that are associated with decreased bone mineralization, more porous bone, and more often a result of just advanced age. They become much more common as we're aging. And it's kind of just like so many other things, sadly, in our culture and in health. A lot of things are just normal aging processes. Like, as you age, your bone mineral density goes down. As you age, your blood pressure goes up. As you age, your cholesterol goes up. As you age, your cognitive function declines. And these kind of things are just kind of these belief systems are just kind of permeating our society and culture. And that doesn't mean that they're normal. Or I should say, of course, just because they are normal in society doesn't mean that they're healthy. So healthy bones are bones that maintain their mineral density as we age. And of course, maybe one could say that it becomes a little bit more of it requires more intentionality to make sure that we're doing all the things that we need as we're aging, because of course, a lot of people as they age, they're not as active. And if we're not increasing or maintaining our muscle mass and weight-bearing activity, then of course that's going to set the stage for lower bone mineral density in and of itself. So all of these things, as we're going to be talking about today, play into the conversation of maintaining those strong, healthy bones. And I just want to, of course, all that being said, say that at any point in our lifespan, we can create and build strong, healthy bones. Just because you're 70 or 75 or 80 or 90 doesn't mean that you're not still regenerating bone cells and laying down new bone, and we can do so optimally. Of course, maybe our regenerative potential is not the same as it was when we were 25 or something like that, but it's there nonetheless, and we can optimize it.
Certainly. So I guess we should start off by talking about calcium, because that's what generally people think about when they talk about bone health, because there has been such an emphasis in the world of nutrition and health to take that calcium supplement for bone health, right? It's probably one of the most isolated mineral supplements out there that people take, right?
Yeah.
You could get it in a little caramel chewy or chocolate chewy or whatever,
In terms of minerals, you're right. I think it is one of the most common isolated minerals that people are like, oh, I should be taking calcium, especially if I'm not drinking milk or
Right.
eating cheese.
Right.
And yeah.
Yeah. So, what are the calcium requirements? Well, that is actually a little bit more controversial than you might think because in our country, the recommended daily allowance is 1,000 milligrams for women and men under 50, and actually even men under 70. But then once women hit 50 and once men hit 70, the recommendation is 1,200 milligrams of calcium a day.
Yeah. And that's actually different than pretty much all countries around the world, I guess, with the exception of Australia. The United States and Australia have the highest recommended daily intake of calcium. All other European countries, and I'm sure Asian countries, actually, I'm not sure, but I would imagine Asian countries and such have lower recommended daily intake, somewhere between 500, 700, 800 milligrams of calcium per day. So lower than the United States. And, you know, I think that it's pretty widely acknowledged to be true that that high recommended daily intake of calcium in our culture has a lot to do with the influence of the dairy industry in policy and public health. Um, and all that being said, like that doesn't mean that dairy consumption is health promoting or promotes healthy bones. In fact, there's been studies that show that the more dairy one consumes, the higher their likelihood is of fracture as they age. So, of course, fracture is a result of the decreased bone mineral density, osteopenia, osteoporosis. Um, so it just makes you kind of scratch your head. And of course, you can go through the literature and find the dairy funded studies that say that dairy is really good and healthy and beneficial and required for maintaining strong, healthy bones. But if you follow the money and kind of weed through all that stuff and just look at the more pure science, which is becoming, of course, harder and harder in our world today, it becomes more and more clear that dairy is absolutely not a requirement for strong, healthy bones. And in fact, very likely to be a risk factor for weak bones, not to mention cancer, prostate cancer, digestive cancers, cardiovascular disease, diabetes, and so many other chronic conditions.
Yeah, so this is a really interesting phenomenon you're talking about because dairy is one of the most calcium rich foods we can consume, but you're saying that with higher dairy consumption, we can actually increase our risk of weak bones. So, what is that all about?
That's a darn good question. Well, it just goes to show that calcium is important, but of course, not the end all be all. And the environment in which we are laying down and utilizing that calcium and putting that calcium to use in the body is much more important than the sheer quantity of calcium we consume. Also, on that, like what you were talking about, calcium supplementation in an isolated mineral capsule or tablet or whatever it might be is also associated with cardiovascular disease and stroke and atherosclerosis, and really the calcification of arteries and other tissues in the body. And that's because turns out we're not really designed to just get a big influx of calcium in supplemental form, and seems to be not in the form of dairy either. When it comes to dairy, one of the things that is interesting is that the acidity of dairy products, the acidity meaning that like it's more acidic, more acid promoting in the body, that acidity actually prevents the absorption of calcium by our bones and into our tissues, because calcium is used as a buffer to maintain our slight alkalinity of the bloodstream. So we actually, in eating more of the calcium rich but acidifying foods, we don't access the calcium from those foods. There has been some like mythology that that the dairy products actually like leach calcium from the bones. That seems to have been debunked. But calcium doesn't make its way into our bones or into our tissues because it's busy being utilized as a buffer to promote more of the balance that our body really needs to maintain in our bloodstream.
Hmm. Yes. Yes. So that's huge to understand because obviously, there are so many other sources of dietary calcium that don't acidify the body. So that calcium can actually be absorbed more easily
Yeah.
and deposited into the bones.
Yeah, and I thought that maybe it would be helpful. Of course, we're talking a lot about calcium and kind of debunking some calcium fairy tales. But of course, we need to understand what calcium is, where it fundamentally comes from, and of course, it's a mineral. And like any mineral comes from earth, you know, through the soil and extracted by the plants and into the leaves and stems and roots of plants, and then animals eat plants and utilize calcium in their bodies. And then, of course, cows are grazing on all these calcium rich plants, ideally. And then that calcium is being concentrated in the milk ducts of dairy cows, and then excreted into dairy, and along with so many other things, right, hormones and whatnot. But in any case, like, fundamentally, calcium and all minerals come from the earth. And when we're looking at bones and bone mineralization, there's a huge emphasis on calcium, and calcium is a big part of bones. Calcium is one of the most abundant minerals in the body, but all the other trace minerals that come along with calcium in nature are equally important. And from our perspective, that's why plant-based sources of calcium, which are of course mineral rich with all the other major and trace minerals, are ideal, not because they have all those minerals in balance, but they're also alkalinizing for the body so that we can actually access those minerals. Also, of course, this brings into the conversation the vitamins, the essential vitamins that are required for optimal bone mineralization, which are vitamin D and vitamin K. Vitamin K is really an amazing vitamin and so important for bone mineralization. And vitamin K is abundant in green leafy vegetables, along with calcium and all other minerals. So nature packages the minerals with the vitamins so that we can put them to use in our body. Of course, vitamin D, which is hugely important for calcium regulation and absorption, doesn't come from our food sources. We get vitamin D from being outside and allowing our skin to biosynthesize vitamin D in our bodies.
Mhm.
But yeah.
Yeah, and I just want to add, before we move on from talking about calcium, I just want to add to what we were saying about those isolated calcium supplements. And most of those supplements, they're derived from like the shells of shellfish and stuff. So
Calcium carbonate.
calcium carbonate. And yeah, and we take that calcium in, like what you're saying, such big amounts, and it's not coming with all the other nutrients that help the body to regulate, absorb, and basically direct calcium to where it needs to go in the body. So one of the reasons you mentioned that it increases the risk of cardiovascular disease and cardiac events, but the main reason for that is that because if we don't have all the other synergistic vitamins and minerals to help the calcium balance, absorption, and direction in the body, then we start calcifying things that aren't meant to be calcified.
Right.
And in the cardiovascular system, what can easily calcify are plaques. And as those plaques grow and become calcified, there's more likelihood of those plaques rupturing and then causing heart attack or stroke or whatever kind of blood clot.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. So of course, hopefully it's becoming clear that calcium is one significant but still kind of somewhat small piece of the puzzle when we're talking about creating and maintaining healthy bones. And all the other minerals are essential. And then vitamin K is essential because that allows calcium to be directed where, like you were saying, where it should be stored in the body. Calcium should be stored in our teeth, our nails, our hair to some extent, our bones, of course. Calcium should not be stored in our cardiovascular system, in our gallbladder, forming calcium gallstones, in our kidneys, calcifying stones in our kidneys. That's not what calcium should be doing in our body, but that's what calcium might do in our body if we don't have enough vitamin K, or if we also have a more acidic environment where that calcium isn't able, is being used as a buffer in the body more so. So those are important. And then, like we kind of already threw out, vitamin D, so important. That's kind of becomes before vitamin K, if you will, in the sense that vitamin D is required for regulating the degree to which we are able to access calcium from our digestive system, and also the degree to which we retain calcium by our kidneys. If we don't have enough vitamin D, we're not absorbing calcium in our digestive system, and we're also excreting more calcium from our kidneys. So we have a calcium deficiency. And calcium, it's a huge, major mineral in our body, like one of the most abundant minerals in our body. But of course, we can overdo it, and we can get too much of it. And that's the role of vitamin D, is to make sure that our calcium levels are staying balanced. So if we don't have enough vitamin D, we're not going to have access to enough calcium.
Mhm.
And if we have a vitamin D toxicity, or vitamin D overdose, or vitamin D excess, we might end up over calcifying ourselves as a consequence as well.
Yes. Yes. So to recap what we've gone over so far, what we need for strong, healthy bones are not only calcium, but other important minerals, vitamin D, vitamin K. We need an anti inflammatory and alkaline environment that allows our tissues, our bones, to actually absorb the calcium.
Yeah.
But this last point is really important.
I think the most important thing.
The most important
This
thing.
kind of trumps everything, and this is simply the weight bearing activity and moving against gravity and really engaging our muscles. And really, how this is so important is that it's our muscles are all attached to our bones via tendons and ligaments, right? So when our tendons and ligaments are pulling on our bone, that actually signals to the bone to grow. It signals to the bone, I gotta get stronger. So as we're strengthening our muscles, we're also strengthening our bones. That's how our bones are able to remodel, is what the terminology is when it comes to bone remineralization. It's breaking down and reforming new bone. And that's that. In order to do that, we need to signal to the bone that there's some resistance, some pressure, some stress. And that stress is in the form of muscular contraction or just sheer gravitational forces. So that's where things like impact activities. And I always think about that thing that you really like, which is like, it stimulates higher gravity and higher impact, but it actually doesn't really give the joints too much stress. That like power plate, those power plates.
There are these vibration plates, and I think the science on them might be a little bit not settled, whether they actually help increase bone density or not. But like astronauts, for example, were kind of prescribed to do exercises when they came back down to Earth on these power plates, because they had spent so much time without that gravity creating that positive stress for their bones. But I do want to reiterate, when people hear weight bearing exercise, I think they tend to think of like lifting weights and going to the gym and jumping up and down and high intensity stuff. But the truth is that weight bearing exercise can also just be walking and hiking, and like using your muscle in any way is going to be beneficial for creating that healthy stress for the bones.
Exactly. 100%.
Because you're maintaining more muscle mass too.
So that's kind of foundation, like just like the as we say, like the foundation of health, just like eating properly, eating the nutrient dense, the calcium rich, the mineral rich foods, etc. But the last couple points here, as we're wrapping up, these are considerations for people who want to quote unquote supplement with calcium, or want to really make sure that they are maybe if they've been diagnosed with osteopenia and want to get out of the osteopenia kind of category or been diagnosed with osteoporosis and want to start considering reversing that and strengthening bones, or just really want to stay proactive when it comes to maintaining strong, healthy bones, the first thing that we like to recommend to get our quote unquote calcium supplement is really just adding in a few extra handfuls of leafy greens. And of course, our daily recommendation for leafy green intake is 6 servings of leafy greens. And, of course, everyone asks, what the heck is a serving? And to me, it's like a handful. And usually there's like a couple servings in, a smoothie, a couple servings in a salad, and you get the idea. So adding in a few extra, 2 or 3 or 4 extra servings of leafy greens is, of course, a great way to get an additional source of calcium, but also all the other minerals, trace minerals, and maybe more importantly, the vitamin K in balance and synergy with that calcium in those green leafy vegetables, so that we can put those minerals to use optimally in the body.
Definitely. But there are some other good whole food sources of calcium that we can actually take in a supplement form. And the main one that comes to mind is marine algae. Like spirulina and chlorella have some good calcium, but also if you look up marine algae supplements, you'll see how much calcium is contained in those specific marine algae supplements.
Yeah, some people go for the red algae, is known as like a high source of calcium. I don't know. Like, it's like when I hear like, oh, well, people bring up in conversation, well, I heard that marine algae or red marine algae is the highest source of calcium. And it's like, okay, well, but knowing what we know about bone mineralization, do we really want to go above and beyond with just focusing on the calcium? Or do we want to just do the broad mineral supplementation, if you will, considering also the vitamin K and everything else in the equation?
Right. Yeah, and like along this track too, I know that some people will rely on like fortified plant milks, for example, to get a source of calcium. But it's just important to recognize that those vitamins that are used to fortify the plant milk, they're not good quality. It is going to be the calcium carbonate, which isn't that ideal form of calcium. So, we definitely prefer that people look at the whole food plant sources and not the fortified plant sources for calcium.
Totally.
Yes.
Totally. So yeah, I think it's pretty simple. I think people tend to overthink and overcomplicate these basic fundamental things that can be really simple and easy. It just comes down to eating enough mineral rich, nutrient dense whole plant foods. Obviously those mineral rich, nutrient dense whole plant foods also have vitamin K, an essential vitamin. They also create that anti-inflammatory alkaline environment in the body so that minerals can be put to use. And then we of course have to be considering our vitamin D status at any given point in time, which doesn't come from our food. We have got to be, going outside to get that. And oftentimes, depending on our location and activity level outside, we got to be considering supplementing with vitamin D3. And most importantly, we have to be considering our physical structure and status and moving our body and, gravity.
I mean, we can, of course, extend this conversation on and on because we also need to consider our digestive health so that we're absorbing calcium into our bloodstream. And also for women who are postmenopausal, calcium absorption will go down because estrogen is a very big factor for calcium deposition in the bone.
Yeah, I'm glad that you brought that up because we didn't really explain why, the recommended daily intake for women over 50 goes up, because of course women over 50, that's generally postmenopausal. That's when we have to consider more the quote unquote calcium supplementation. That's why women are higher risk for osteopenia, osteoporosis than men, because the hormonal changes that take place in women.
Yeah.
So what you're saying is we can offset those changes, mitigate those not like we can't like stop the hormonal changes, of course, unless we're taking, hormone replacement therapy, but we can stop the physiologic kind of consequences of those hormonal changes with regard to calcium. And yeah, what are some things to consider?
Well, yeah, just to support the calcium absorption and deposition in the body, we can bring in foods that contain uh, phytonutrients that are estrogen modulating.
Yes, such as
Such as soy. And the reason why we're not using the term phytoestrogen for soy anymore is because phytoestrogen, that word tends to freak people out. But the truth about phytoestrogens is that they modulate estrogen. If your levels are too low, then it will increase the effects of estrogen in the body. If your estrogen levels are too high, then it'll actually block excessive estrogen activity in the body. It'll actually block estrogen receptors and downregulate its effects in the body.
Yeah.
So yes, soy, also flax, and some other herbs can be very helpful in
And
modulating estrogen.
we're just going on and on into a whole different realm of conversation here, but I'm glad we had the opportunity to just share the difference between women's hormones and men's hormones and how that plays into account as well. But big picture, eat enough, eat real whole plant foods, and move your body and be happy, and your bones will too.
Yes. So before we leave today, we have an exciting announcement. Maybe you've already heard about that the Alter Health Summer Cleanse is starting up real soon on July 17th. July 17th. And we're currently in early bird sign up phase,
That's
correct?
right. That's right.
Yes. So if you head over to www.alter.health, you will see lots of options to join the cleanse. And
You'll just see one option.
Okay,
actually.
you'll see one option to join
Yeah.
the cleanse. And what's the coupon code?
It's already in there. I forget what it is,
Alright.
but you get $20 off.
All right.
Yeah, so we hope to see you in the cleanse. If you got any questions, reach out. Hope you found this information valuable and are feeling at peace and strong with your bones and beyond. We look forward to seeing you guys next time.